The autumn rain drummed against the tall windows of Riverside Community Center in Phoenix, Arizona, each droplet catching the warm amber light from the vintage chandeliers hanging above. Inside the grand ballroom, the annual Phoenix Business Women's Network Gala was in full swing. Round tables draped in crisp white linens filled the space, adorned with centerpieces of desert roses and eucalyptus. The gentle hum of conversation mixed with the soft jazz quartet playing in the corner, creating an atmosphere of refined elegance. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Women in tailored blazers and flowing evening dresses moved gracefully between tables, wine glasses in hand, networking cards exchanged with practiced smiles. The air carried hints of expensive perfume, fresh flowers, and the subtle aroma of the catered dinner that had just concluded. Crystal glasses clinked in toasts to success, achievements, and the bright futures these accomplished women were building in the corporate world of Phoenix. At table 7, near the back of the ballroom, sat Rebecca Martinez. While the other women at her table wore designer dresses and statement jewelry, Rebecca had chosen a simple navy blue blazer over dark slacks. Her shoulder-length auburn hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore minimal makeup that couldn't quite conceal the small scar running along her left temple. Her hands, wrapped around a glass of untouched white wine, bore the subtle marks of someone who had worked with more than spreadsheets and keyboards. Rebecca's posture was straight but relaxed, her green eyes taking in the room with a kind of awareness that seemed almost automatic. She listened politely as the other women at her table discussed quarterly earnings, market projections, and weekend plans at country clubs. When spoken to directly, she responded with thoughtful, measured words, but she volunteered little about herself beyond her current role as a logistics coordinator for a local medical supply company. "So, Rebecca," said Patricia Thornfield, a real estate executive with perfectly styled blonde hair and diamond earrings that caught the light with every gesture. "You're relatively new to Phoenix, aren't you? What brought you here from—" She paused, realizing she didn't actually know where Rebecca had come from. "Various places," Rebecca replied with a gentle smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I've moved around quite a bit over the years. Phoenix feels like home now, though." The response was polite, but deliberately vague, and Patricia seemed to sense there was more to the story. She leaned forward slightly, her curiosity piqued. "Oh, a nomadic spirit. How adventurous. What kind of work were you in before logistics?" Rebecca's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around her wineglass. "Different things. I prefer to focus on what I'm doing now." Seated to Rebecca's left was Madison Wells, a marketing director for a tech startup. Madison was younger than the others, probably in her late 20s, with straight black hair and an energy that suggested she'd had too much caffeine earlier in the evening. She had been scrolling through her phone intermittently throughout dinner, posting updates about the gala to her various social media accounts. "That's so mysterious," Madison said with a laugh that sounded more like a challenge than amusement. "Come on, we're all friends here. What's the big secret? Were you a spy or something?" The question hung in the air for a moment, and Rebecca's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. "Nothing quite so dramatic," she said calmly. "Just prefer to live in the present." As Rebecca reached for her water glass, her blazer sleeve rode up slightly, revealing the edge of what appeared to be a tattoo on her forearm. The design was partially obscured, but visible were the letters PJ in a distinctive military-style font, surrounded by what looked like wings. Madison's eyes immediately locked onto the exposed ink. "Oh my God, you have a tattoo! I would never have guessed. You seem so conservative." She said the last word as if it were mildly disappointing. Rebecca quickly adjusted her sleeve, covering the tattoo, but it was too late. The other women at the table had noticed Madison's excitement and were now looking at Rebecca with renewed interest. "Let's see it!" exclaimed Jennifer Clark, a financial advisor with short gray hair and an expensive handbag clutched in her lap. "I've been thinking about getting one myself. Something small and tasteful, of course." "It's nothing special," Rebecca said, her voice remaining steady but a slight tension creeping into her shoulders. "Just something from a long time ago." Quote. But Madison was already leaning closer, her phone in her hand, as if ready to capture whatever revelation might come next. "Oh, come on, don't be shy. I bet there's a great story behind it. There always is with tattoos." The women at the table were now all focused on Rebecca, their previous conversations about business forgotten in favor of this new mystery. The attention seemed to make Rebecca uncomfortable, though she maintained her composure with the kind of grace that suggested she'd weathered far more intense scrutiny than this. "Really, it's not interesting," Rebecca insisted, taking a sip of her wine and glancing toward the exit as if calculating the distance. Patricia, emboldened by the wine and the group dynamic, reached out as if to push up Rebecca's sleeve. "Don't be modest. We're all women here. What could be so?" "Please don't." Rebecca's voice cut through the chatter with quiet authority, and her hand moved to cover her forearm protectively. The simple request carried enough weight that Patricia pulled her hand back, looking slightly chastened. But the damage was done. The table had fallen into an awkward silence, and the other women exchanged glances that mixed curiosity with judgment. In their world of transparent LinkedIn profiles and carefully curated Instagram feeds, Rebecca's privacy seemed almost suspicious. "You know," Madison said, breaking the silence with a tone that suggested she was trying to lighten the mood but actually making it worse, "most people who get tattoos want to show them off, especially if they're meaningful. What's the point of having one if you're going to hide it?" Rebecca set down her wineglass with deliberate care. "Some things are personal. But that's what makes them interesting," Madison pressed on, seemingly oblivious to Rebecca's discomfort. "I mean, we've all shared stories tonight. Jennifer told us about her divorce. Patricia talked about her son's struggles in college. We're building connections here. Isn't that what networking is about?" The comment stung, and Rebecca could feel the weight of expectation from the women around the table. In their world, vulnerability was currency, and stories were traded like business cards. Her reluctance to participate in this exchange was being interpreted as standoffishness, maybe even arrogance. "Look," said Jennifer, attempting what she probably thought was a compassionate tone, "we're not trying to pry. It's just that you've been pretty quiet all evening. We'd love to get to know you better. You seem so guarded." The word guarded hung in the air like an accusation. Rebecca felt the familiar weight of being misunderstood, of having her natural reserve interpreted as coldness or superiority. These women saw her reluctance to share as a character flaw, rather than a necessity born from experiences they couldn't imagine. Across the ballroom, the jazz quartet transitioned into a slower number, and the ambient noise of conversation seemed to dim slightly. The lighting from the chandeliers cast long shadows across the tables, and Rebecca found herself remembering other evenings, in far different circumstances, where the wrong word or gesture could mean the difference between life and death. "I'm sorry if I've seemed unfriendly," Rebecca said finally, her voice carrying a weariness that the others interpreted as defensiveness. "That wasn't my intention." Madison's expression softened slightly, but her curiosity remained undimmed. No, you haven't been unfriendly, just mysterious. And honestly, it's kind of intriguing. I mean, you carry yourself like you've seen things, you know, like you've got stories." The observation was more perceptive than Madison probably realized. Rebecca had indeed seen things, done things, lived through experiences that would be incomprehensible to the women sharing her table. But those experiences weren't cocktail party anecdotes or networking talking points. They were memories that came with weight, responsibility, and sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, a grief that felt as fresh as the day it was earned. "We all have stories," Rebecca replied diplomatically. "Some are just meant to stay private." Patricia, who had been uncharacteristically quiet since Rebecca's earlier rebuff, suddenly spoke up with the tone of someone who'd had just enough wine to lower her usual filters. "You know what I think? I think you're one of those people who thinks they're too good for the rest of us. Like your story is somehow more important or dramatic than ours." The accusation landed like a slap, and Rebecca felt her cheeks flush. Around the table, the other women shifted uncomfortably, sensing that the evening's dynamic had just shifted into dangerous territory. "That's not true," Rebecca said quietly, but Patricia was just getting started. "Oh, please." The mysterious past, the hidden tattoo, the vague answers about your previous work. It's all very dramatic and special, isn't it? Meanwhile, the rest of us are here trying to build genuine connections, sharing real parts of our lives. Rebecca's jaw tightened, but she didn't rise to the bait. She'd learned long ago that defending herself against such accusations often only made them worse. Instead, she simply looked at Patricia with steady green eyes that held depths the real estate executive couldn't begin to fathom. "You're entitled to your opinion," Rebecca said calmly. The response seemed to frustrate Patricia even more. "See? Even now, you're acting like you're above it all, like you're somehow better than the rest of us ordinary people with our ordinary problems." Madison, perhaps realizing that her curiosity had helped spark this confrontation, attempted to intervene. "Hey, let's all just—" "No," Patricia continued, her voice rising slightly. "I'm tired of people who think they're so special, so different. We're all here trying to support each other as businesswomen, and she sits there like she's got some big secret that makes her more interesting than everyone else." The words cut deeper than Patricia could have known. Rebecca had spent years trying to blend in, to be ordinary, to leave behind the parts of herself that had been forged in places where ordinary people never had to go. The accusation that she thought herself superior was particularly painful because it was so far from the truth. If anything, she often felt like an imposter in rooms like this, surrounded by women who'd built their success through traditional paths, while she'd learned her skills in ways she could never fully explain. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Rebecca stood slowly, her movements controlled and deliberate. The other women at the table looked up at her with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension, unsure whether she was about to defend herself or simply leave. "I think," Rebecca said carefully, "there's been a misunderstanding. I never intended to suggest that my experiences were more important than anyone else's. If I've given that impression, I apologize." Her words were measured and diplomatic, the kind of careful de-escalation that came from years of navigating situations where the wrong response could have catastrophic consequences. But to the women at the table, her composure probably looked like coldness, her careful words like condescension. Patricia crossed her arms, clearly not satisfied with the response. "Apologies are easy. Actions speak louder. If you really wanted to be part of this community, you'd make an effort to actually connect with people, instead of hiding behind your mysterious persona." The irony wasn't lost on Rebecca. She'd spent her career connecting with people in the most profound way possible, risking everything to save their lives. But those connections couldn't be reduced to networking small talk, or turned into inspirational anecdotes for business dinners. As Rebecca stood there, feeling the weight of judgment from women who knew nothing about her, she became acutely aware of the tattoo hidden beneath her sleeve. The letters PJ and the distinctive wings represented a brotherhood forged in the crucible of life and death missions, a commitment to others that these women couldn't possibly understand. But explaining it would require revealing parts of herself that she'd learned to keep buried, not out of shame, but out of necessity. The autumn rain continued to drum against the windows, and somewhere across the ballroom a woman laughed at something her companion had said. The sound seemed to come from another world, a place where the heaviest burden anyone carried was a difficult client or a challenging quarterly report. Rebecca looked at each of the women at her table, Patricia with her accusatory stare, Madison with her curious but judgmental expression, Jennifer with her uncomfortable silence. She saw successful, accomplished women who'd built their lives within the safe boundaries of corporate America, and she felt the familiar loneliness of someone whose experiences existed outside those boundaries. But she also saw something else, the human need for connection, for understanding, for validation that everyone at the table shared, even if they expressed it in different ways. Patricia's anger, Madison's curiosity, Jennifer's discomfort, they all stemmed from the same desire to know and be known that drove Rebecca's own carefully guarded behavior. The difference was that Rebecca had learned, through experiences these women would never face, that some connections came with costs that couldn't be calculated in professional terms. Some stories, once told, couldn't be untold. And some parts of oneself, once revealed, changed forever how others saw you. As she stood there in the elegant ballroom, surrounded by the trappings of civilian success, Rebecca felt the weight of two worlds, the one she'd left behind and the one she was trying to build. The challenge wasn't just defending herself against Patricia's accusations. It was figuring out how to bridge the gap between who she'd been and who she was trying to become, without losing herself in the process. The tension at Table 7 had drawn subtle attention from neighboring tables, though the sophisticated veneer of the gala meant that most guests simply glanced over with polite curiosity before returning to their own conversations. Rebecca remained standing, her hand instinctively adjusting her blazer sleeve once more, ensuring the tattoo stayed hidden beneath the navy fabric. Madison, perhaps sensing an opportunity to capture some drama for her social media, discreetly angled her phone toward the table. "Look, Rebecca, I don't think Patricia meant anything personal. We're just genuinely curious about you. You have this whole aura about you. Like you've been to places the rest of us haven't. The comment was meant to be flattering, but it only served to highlight the growing divide between Rebecca and the other women. Patricia's face flushed slightly with wine and indignation. She wasn't ready to let the matter drop. "Aura?" Patricia scoffed, her diamond earrings catching the chandelier light as she shook her head. "That's exactly what I'm talking about. Why does everything about her have to be so mystical and special? She's a logistics coordinator, not some exotic foreign correspondent." Jennifer Clark shifted uncomfortably in her chair, clearly wishing the conversation would move in a different direction. "Maybe we should just—" "No, Jennifer," Patricia interrupted, her voice gaining strength. "I'm tired of walking on eggshells around people who think they're too important to participate in normal human interaction. This is supposed to be a networking event, not a shrine to Rebecca's mysterious past." Rebecca felt her pulse quicken, not from fear. She'd long ago learned to manage that particular emotion, but from the familiar frustration of being misunderstood. The irony of Patricia's accusations stung particularly deep. If she only knew how desperately Rebecca wanted to participate in, quote, normal human interaction, how much she longed for conversations that didn't require careful navigation around classified experiences and traumatic memories. "I understand you're frustrated," Rebecca said, her voice maintaining its calm cadence despite the growing hostility. "But I'm not trying to be mysterious or special. Some things are just private." Madison leaned forward, her curiosity overriding any sense of social boundaries. "But why, though? I mean, what could be so terrible about a tattoo that you can't even let us see it? It's not like you have Nazi symbols or gang signs or something, right?" The casual comparison made Rebecca's jaw clench almost imperceptibly. The tattoo hidden beneath her sleeve represented everything she held sacred: courage, sacrifice, the willingness to risk everything for strangers. To have it reduced to a potential source of shame or embarrassment felt like a particular kind of insult. "It's not terrible," Rebecca replied carefully. "It's just personal." Patricia let out an exasperated sigh. "Everything is personal with you. Your previous job was personal. Your tattoo is personal. Your entire life story is apparently off-limits. How exactly are we supposed to build professional relationships with someone who won't even engage in basic conversation?" The accusation hit closer to home than Patricia realized. Rebecca had been struggling with exactly this issue since transitioning to civilian life. How do you build normal relationships when half your experiences are classified? How do you make small talk when your stories involve life-and-death situations that most people can't comprehend? The skills that had made her exceptional in her previous life, compartmentalization, operational security, emotional control, often made her seem cold or distant in civilian settings. Around them, the gala continued its elegant rhythm. The jazz quartet had moved on to a more upbeat number, and several women had moved to the small dance floor near the stage. Servers in black uniforms glided between tables, refilling wine glasses and clearing dessert plates. The normalcy of it all felt almost surreal to Rebecca, who found herself hyper-aware of exits, security cameras, and potential threats, even in the safest of civilian environments. "Look," Madison said, apparently trying a different approach. "I get that some people are more private than others, but you have to understand how it looks from our perspective. You show up to these events, you sit quietly in the corner, you deflect every personal question, and then you act surprised when people notice you're being evasive." Quote. Rebecca felt a familiar weight settling on her chest, the burden of carrying experiences that couldn't be shared, stories that couldn't be told, achievements that couldn't be acknowledged. In her former life, recognition had been rare and usually came in the form of classified commendations that few people would ever see. The transition to a world where success was measured in public achievements and shared narratives had been more difficult than she'd anticipated. "I'm not trying to be evasive," Rebecca said, though even as she spoke the words, she knew they weren't entirely true. Evasion had become second nature, a protective mechanism developed over years of operating in environments where the wrong information in the wrong hands could cost lives. Patricia's patience had clearly reached its limit. "Then prove it. Show us the tattoo. If it's really not a big deal, if you're really not trying to be mysterious and special, then just show us what you're hiding." The demand hung in the air like a challenge. Rebecca could feel the eyes of the other women on her, could sense their judgment and curiosity mixing into something that felt almost predatory. This was the moment she'd been dreading, the inevitable collision between her need for privacy and civilian society's expectation of transparency. Jennifer finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Patricia, maybe that's not really fair. I mean, if she doesn't want to. Fair? Patricia's voice rose slightly, drawing more attention from neighboring tables. What's not fair is having someone join our networking group who refuses to actually network. What's not fair is pretending to be part of a community while holding yourself apart from everyone else. The words struck deep, touching on Rebecca's greatest fear about civilian life, that she would never truly belong, that the experiences that had shaped her would always set her apart from the people she was trying to build relationships with. The accusation that she was holding herself apart was particularly painful because it contained just enough truth to sting. Madison, emboldened by Patricia's directness, pressed her advantage. I mean, come on, Rebecca, it's just a tattoo. Unless you're hiding something really scandalous, what's the big deal? We've all seen tattoos before. But Rebecca knew it wasn't just a tattoo. The pararescue wings and PJ designation represented a world these women couldn't imagine, a brotherhood forged in the crucible of combat medicine, where split-second decisions meant the difference between bringing someone home alive or in a flag-draped coffin. The tattoo carried the weight of every life she'd saved, every mission she'd completed, every time she'd jumped out of a perfectly good aircraft into hostile territory because someone needed help. Some symbols carry more weight than others, Rebecca said carefully, her hand moving unconsciously to cover her forearm again. Patricia's eyes narrowed at the gesture. See, there it is again. Everything with you has to be dramatic and weighted and meaningful. God forbid you just have a butterfly or a flower like a normal person. The comment revealed more about Patricia's assumptions than she probably realized. In her world, tattoos were fashion statements, or expressions of personality. The idea that they might represent something deeper, something earned through sacrifice and service, seemed foreign to her. Madison pulled out her phone more openly now, clearly hoping to capture whatever revelation might come next. I bet it's military, isn't it? You have that whole disciplined thing going on. Were you in the army or something? The question was closer to the truth than Rebecca was comfortable with, and she felt her carefully maintained composure starting to crack. I'd rather not discuss it. Oh my God, it is military! Madison's excitement was palpable. That's so cool. Why didn't you just say so? There's nothing wrong with being a veteran. Actually, it's kind of badass. But Patricia wasn't ready to let Rebecca off the hook so easily. If it's something to be proud of, then why all the secrecy? Why make us drag it out of you like we're interrogating a criminal? The word interrogating triggered something in Rebecca's memory. Flashes of actual interrogations, of hostile questioning under far more dangerous circumstances. She forced the memories down, focusing on the present moment, on the elegant ballroom and the women who saw her reluctance as arrogance rather than necessity. Not everything that someone is proud of needs to be displayed publicly, Rebecca said, her voice carrying a slight edge for the first time that evening. Jennifer, clearly uncomfortable with the escalating tension, attempted to change the subject. I read an article recently about how different generations have different attitudes toward privacy. Maybe we should just... No, Jennifer, Patricia interrupted again, her wine-fueled determination evident. This isn't about generational differences. This is about basic social courtesy. When you join a group like this, there's an expectation of reciprocity. We share, you share. That's how relationships work. Rebecca felt the familiar weight of being caught between two worlds, the classified world she'd left behind and the transparent world she was trying to enter. The skills and experiences that had made her exceptional in her former life were now working against her, making her seem suspicious and aloof to people who'd never had to consider the operational security implications of casual conversation. Madison, sensing Patricia's momentum, decided to push further. I mean, if you were really just trying to fit in, you'd have mentioned being a veteran earlier. It's not like it's shameful. Unless you were discharged for something bad? Is that what you're hiding? The insinuation hit Rebecca like a physical blow. The idea that her service, her sacrifice, her dedication, the lives she'd risked everything to save, could be reduced to something shameful was almost more than she could bear. Her hand clenched into a fist beneath the table, and for a moment, the careful control she'd maintained all evening threatened to slip entirely. I was not dishonorably discharged, Rebecca said, her voice quiet but carrying an authority that made the other women pause. Patricia, however, was too invested in her position to back down now. Then what's the problem? Show us the tattoo. Prove that you're not just playing games with us. The challenge was direct and unavoidable. Rebecca looked around the table at the three women who'd backed her into this corner. Patricia with her righteous indignation, Madison with her voyeuristic curiosity, Jennifer with her uncomfortable silence. She thought about the other veterans she knew who'd struggled with similar situations, the impossible choice between maintaining necessary boundaries and appearing antisocial. The irony wasn't lost on her that these women, who prided themselves on being supportive of other women, were now attacking her for the very qualities that had made her successful in her previous career. The compartmentalization, the operational security mindset, the ability to maintain composure under pressure. These weren't character flaws. They were survival skills developed over years of serving in situations where mistakes cost lives. But in this elegant ballroom, surrounded by successful businesswomen who measured their worth in transparent achievements and shared stories, those same skills made her seem cold, mysterious, and arrogant. The gap between her world and theirs had never felt wider. Rebecca looked down at her sleeve, at the fabric that hid the symbol of everything she'd once been. Beneath the navy material lay the wings that represented her willingness to jump into danger when others needed help, the PJ designation that marked her as one of the elite few who'd earned the right to wear it. But here, in this civilian setting, those symbols were just another source of division, another barrier to the normal relationships she desperately wanted to build. The jazz quartet finished their song, and in the brief silence that followed, Rebecca could hear her own heartbeat, steady and controlled, despite the emotional storm raging inside her. She'd faced enemy fire with less anxiety than she felt at this moment, cornered by women who thought they were fighting for transparency, but were actually demanding that she sacrifice the very boundaries that had kept her sane through years of impossible situations. Patricia leaned forward, sensing victory. "Well, are you going to keep playing games, or are you going to show us what you're hiding?" Near the edge of the ballroom, at a high-top table positioned strategically by the bar, 3 women nursed their drinks with the measured pace of people accustomed to staying alert in any environment. They weren't part of the main networking crowd, having arrived late and chosen seats that offered clear sightlines of the entire room. To most observers, they appeared to be casual attendees, perhaps members who worked unconventional schedules or had traveled from out of town. Colonel Sarah Chen, retired Air Force, sat with her back to the wall, a habit ingrained from 23 years of military service. Her black hair was streaked with premature silver, styled in a professional bob that didn't quite conceal the small scar behind her left ear, a souvenir from a helicopter crash in Afghanistan that had ended her active duty career. She wore a charcoal gray suit that was elegant but practical, the kind of outfit that could transition from boardroom to emergency situation without drawing unwanted attention. To her right sat Major Lisa Rodriguez, whose civilian clothes couldn't quite disguise the bearing of someone who'd spent 15 years as a combat rescue officer. Her dark eyes constantly scanned the room with the automatic threat assessment behavior of a former special operations officer. The small American flag pin on her lapel was the only outward sign of her military background, though anyone who knew what to look for would have noticed the way she positioned herself to maintain situational awareness of all entry and exit points. The third member of their impromptu group was Captain Angela Foster, whose transition to civilian life was more recent and still showed in the precise way she held herself, the careful economy of her movements. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a style that looked professional, but could be quickly secured if action became necessary. Unlike her companions, she seemed slightly uncomfortable in the formal setting, occasionally tugging at her dress jacket as if it didn't quite fit right. The 3 women had found each other earlier in the evening through the subtle recognition signals that veterans often develop, a certain posture, a particular way of scanning a room, the unconscious habit of noting escape routes and potential cover. They'd gravitated toward each other without explicit discussion, drawn by the comfort of being around people who understood their shared experiences. "Networking events," Angela muttered, swirling the ice in her whiskey. "Never thought I'd miss briefing rooms, but at least those had a clear objective." Sarah smiled, though her eyes remained focused on the crowd. "The objective here is the same as anywhere else. Gather intelligence, build alliances, complete the mission. Just different rules of engagement." Lisa nodded toward the main floor where women in designer dresses moved between tables with practiced social grace. "Half these people probably think the biggest crisis they'll ever face is a failed product launch or a difficult merger. Must be nice to live in a world where those are your worst-case scenarios." Their conversation was interrupted by a subtle shift in the atmosphere at table 7. Sarah's attention was drawn by the body language of the women seated there. The aggressive, forward lean of one woman, the defensive posturing of another. As a former intelligence officer, she'd developed an eye for social dynamics that might indicate larger problems. "Situation developing at 7 o'clock, she said quietly, using the directional reference system that came naturally to all three women. Angela followed her gaze. "Looks like someone's getting ganged up on. Should we be concerned?" Lisa studied the scene more carefully. The woman standing at the table had a familiar bearing, controlled, alert, maintaining composure under pressure. There was something about her posture that triggered recognition, though Lisa couldn't immediately place what it was. "The one standing," Lisa said slowly. "There's something about her." Sarah had noticed it too. The way the woman held herself spoke of training, of experiences that went beyond corporate boardrooms. Even from across the room, there was something in her stance that suggested someone who'd been tested in ways that most of the gala attendees never would be. As they watched, the confrontation at table 7 seemed to intensify. The blonde woman in diamonds was gesturing aggressively, while a younger woman with black hair had her phone out, clearly recording or preparing to record whatever drama might unfold. The standing woman, Rebecca, though they didn't know her name yet, remained still, her hand positioned protectively over her left forearm. "Defensive posturing around what looks like a concealed marking," Angela observed, her training and tactical assessment kicking in automatically. "Could be covering an injury, but the placement and her body language suggest." "Tattoo," Sarah finished. "And based on how protective she's being about it, probably not your average civilian ink." Lisa leaned forward slightly, her interest piqued. Something about the scene was triggering memories, patterns of behavior she'd seen before in very specific contexts. The woman's composure under verbal assault, the way she positioned herself to maintain awareness of her surroundings even while focused on the immediate threat. It all suggested training that went beyond civilian experience. $10 says military, Angela said quietly. "No bet," Sarah replied. "The question is which branch and how recent." As they continued to observe, the situation at table 7 escalated further. The blonde woman's voice rose enough that fragments of her words carried across the room. Accusations about being secretive, demands for transparency. The standing woman's response was too quiet to hear, but her body language remained controlled, professional. "She's de-escalating," Lisa noted with professional appreciation. "Textbook conflict management. Voice control, non-threatening posture, but ready to move if things go sideways." Sarah nodded. "Whoever she is, she's had training in handling hostile situations. That's not a business school curriculum." The three veterans watched as the confrontation continued to build. Other tables were beginning to notice now, though most of the attendees seemed content to observe from a distance rather than intervene. The social dynamics of the gala created a kind of amphitheater effect, with the drama at table 7 becoming inadvertent entertainment for the surrounding audience. "This is going to get ugly," Angela predicted. "The blondes had too much wine, the young ones looking for social media content, and our mystery woman is getting cornered. That's a bad combination." Lisa found herself studying the standing woman more intently. There was something familiar about her bearing, something that nagged at the edge of memory. The way she held her shoulders, the slight tension in her stance, it reminded Lisa of briefings she'd attended, of fellow officers she'd served with. "I know this sounds crazy," Lisa said slowly, "but there's something about her that's really familiar, like I've seen her before, but I can't place where." Sarah glanced at her companion. "Recent discharge? Maybe you crossed paths during transition programs." "Maybe." Lisa frowned, trying to pin down the elusive memory. "Or maybe she just has that look. You know how it is. Once you've been in life, you develop a certain way of carrying yourself. Could be recognizing the type rather than the individual." But even as she said it, Lisa wasn't convinced. The feeling of familiarity was too specific, too pointed to be just general recognition of military bearing. Something about the woman's profile, the way she moved, triggered memories that felt important, but remained frustratingly out of reach. At table 7, the confrontation reached a new level of intensity. The blonde woman, Patricia, was now openly demanding that Rebecca reveal whatever she was hiding beneath her sleeve. The accusation of playing games carried clearly across the ballroom, drawing even more attention from nearby tables. Hostile interrogation tactics, Angela observed grimly. Public shaming, peer pressure, escalating demands. If our girl really is military, she's probably handled worse, but this kind of civilian hostility can be harder to navigate than enemy contact. Sarah understood what Angela meant. In military situations, the rules were clear. You knew who the enemy was, what they wanted, how to respond. But civilian conflicts operated under different rules, with social and professional consequences that could be just as devastating as physical threats. A veteran trained to handle armed hostiles might find themselves completely unprepared for the subtle violence of social ostracism. "She needs backup," Lisa said, surprising herself with the intensity of her reaction. Whatever her story is, she doesn't deserve to get torn apart by a pack of wine-drunk networking vultures. But even as the words left her mouth, Lisa held back from immediate action. Military training had taught her the importance of understanding a situation fully before intervening. They didn't know the full context, didn't understand the relationships involved. Charging in blindly could make things worse rather than better. Angela was thinking along similar lines. "We don't know the players yet. Could be she brought this on herself somehow. Maybe there's history we're not seeing." "Possible," Sarah agreed, though her instincts were telling her otherwise. "But look at her body language. She's not aggressive, not confrontational. She's trying to disengage without escalating. That suggests someone who's been trained in conflict avoidance, not someone looking for a fight." As they watched, Rebecca's hand moved again to adjust her sleeve, the gesture becoming more pronounced as the pressure increased. The protective movement was automatic, unconscious, and it spoke to the importance of whatever she was concealing. "If that is military ink," Lisa said thoughtfully, "it's probably not just decorative. Unit insignia, maybe, or specialty designation." "The way she's protecting it suggests significant meaning," Sarah added. "Not just service record, but probably specific achievement or qualification." Angela's expression darkened. "Which makes this whole thing even worse. If she earned something significant enough to tattoo it permanently, she deserves respect, not harassment from people who've never put their lives on the line for anything more dangerous than a hostile takeover." The three women fell silent for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts about the dynamics playing out across the room. They'd all struggled with similar challenges during their own transitions to civilian life. The difficulty of translating military experiences into civilian context. The challenge of building relationships with people who couldn't understand their background. The constant balancing act between honoring their service and fitting into new environments. Lisa suddenly straightened, her eyes widening with recognition. "Oh my God." "What?" Sarah and Angela asked simultaneously. "I know where I've seen her." Lisa's voice carried a mixture of excitement and disbelief. "If I'm right, and I really think I am, that's Rebecca Martinez." The name clearly meant something to Sarah, whose expression shifted from curiosity to something approaching awe. "Martinez, are you sure?" "The profile, the bearing, the way she handles pressure," Lisa nodded with growing certainty. "It has to be her." Angela looked between her companions in confusion. "I'm missing something here. Who's Rebecca Martinez?" Sarah leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "If Lisa's right, Rebecca Martinez is a legend. Air Force Pararescue, multiple deployments, decorated for valor. She was involved in some of the most dangerous rescue operations of the last decade." "The Kabul hospital extraction," Lisa added, her voice carrying reverence. "The Mosul siege rescue, Operation Golden Phoenix in Syria. If that's really her, she's saved more lives than most entire units." Angela's eyes widened. "The Pararescue Martinez? I thought she was still on active duty." "Medical retirement, I heard," Sarah said. "Combat injuries that ended her jumping career. But if she's here, in Phoenix, trying to build a civilian life." She trailed off, looking back at Table 7 where Rebecca was still enduring Patricia's verbal assault. "And those idiots are attacking her for having the audacity to keep her service record private," Lisa said, anger clear in her voice. The three veterans watched as the situation continued to deteriorate. Patricia's demands were becoming more aggressive, Madison's phone was openly recording now, and Rebecca was clearly running out of options for peaceful de-escalation. The woman who had once risked everything to save strangers in combat zones was now being publicly humiliated by people who couldn't imagine the kind of sacrifice she'd made. "We have to do something," Angela said firmly. "Agreed," Sarah replied. "But we need to be smart about it. If she's trying to maintain a low profile, we can't just charge over there announcing her service record." Lisa nodded. "Subtle intervention. Make our presence known. Provide backup without escalating the situation further." "And if subtle doesn't work?" Angela asked. Sarah's expression hardened. "Then we remind these civilians what respect looks like. The three women finished their drinks and began moving slowly toward Table 7, each drawing on decades of tactical experience to approach without appearing threatening. They understood that the next few minutes would determine whether Rebecca Martinez, if their identification was correct, would be driven away from yet another attempt at civilian integration, or whether she'd finally find the support and understanding she deserved. As they moved through the crowd, Lisa found herself remembering the stories she'd heard about Martinez's service, the impossible rescues, the lives saved against overwhelming odds, the dedication that had ultimately cost her the career she'd loved. The idea that such a hero was being publicly humiliated by people who'd never risked anything more dangerous than a bad quarterly report filled her with a cold anger that reminded her why she'd sometimes struggled with civilian life herself. The distance between their table and Table 7 suddenly seemed much longer than the actual physical space. Each step carried the weight of recognition, of understanding, of the unspoken bond between warriors who'd served in the places where ordinary people never had to go. The confrontation at Table 7 had reached a fever pitch that commanded attention from half the ballroom. Patricia's voice carried across the elegant space with the sharp edge of someone who'd crossed the line from assertive networking into something far more personal and vicious. "You know what I think?" Patricia announced loudly enough that conversations at neighboring tables began to pause. "I think you're one of those stolen valor types. Probably bought some military surplus gear online and got a fake tattoo to make yourself seem interesting." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Even Madison, who'd been eagerly documenting the drama on her phone, seemed taken aback by the viciousness of the charge. Jennifer's face went pale, and she looked around nervously at the growing audience their table was attracting. Rebecca felt the words hit her like a physical blow. Stolen valor. The accusation that she was pretending to military service she'd never earned was perhaps the most insulting thing anyone could say to a genuine veteran. The irony that she was being accused of fabricating the very service she was trying to keep private would have been laughable if it weren't so painful. "That's not true," Rebecca said quietly, her voice steady despite the rage building inside her chest. "Prove it then," Patricia shot back, emboldened by the attention she was receiving. "Show us this mysterious tattoo that's so important you have to hide it like some state secret. Unless, of course, you can't, because it's not what you're pretending it is." Around the ballroom, other guests had abandoned any pretense of not watching. Some had their phones out now, following Madison's lead in documenting what was clearly becoming the evening's main entertainment. The jazz quartet had finished their set, and without the background music, every word of the confrontation carried clearly through the space. Madison, sensing the perfect storm of drama and social media opportunity, moved her chair closer to get a better angle with her phone. "This is incredible," she whispered to Jennifer, not quite quietly enough. "This is going to get so many views." The comment made Rebecca's stomach turn. Her most private struggles, the careful boundaries she'd built to protect her mental health and operational security, were being turned into entertainment for strangers' social media feeds. The thought of her story, whatever version these people chose to tell, being broadcast to thousands of people who knew nothing about her service or sacrifice, was almost unbearable. Jennifer finally found her voice, though it came out weak and uncertain. "Patricia, maybe we should just drop this. People are staring." "Let them stare," Patricia replied, her wine-flushed face showing no trace of embarrassment. "I'm tired of people who think they can waltz into our professional community with fake credentials and mysterious backgrounds. If she wants to be here, she needs to prove she belongs." The demand for proof struck at the heart of Rebecca's deepest fears about civilian life. In the military, her credentials had been earned through blood, sweat, and sacrifice. Her worth had been measured in lives saved, missions completed, and the trust of teammates who depended on her in impossible situations. But here, in this glittering ballroom full of successful businesswomen, none of that seemed to matter. Here, authenticity was measured by how much of yourself you were willing to expose for public consumption. "I don't have to prove anything to you," Rebecca said, her voice carrying a note of authority that made several nearby guests take notice. Patricia's eyes flashed with triumph. "See, that's exactly what someone with something to hide would say. If you really earned whatever that tattoo represents, you'd be proud to show it. You'd want people to know about your service." The assumption that pride required public display revealed how little Patricia understood about the kind of service Rebecca had performed. The most dangerous missions, the most critical rescues, the operations that saved the most lives, those were often the ones that could never be publicly acknowledged. Rebecca's proudest moments were classified at levels that would remain secret for decades, if not forever. Madison leaned forward eagerly, her phone held steady to capture every moment. "Come on, Rebecca, just show us. What's the worst that could happen? It's not like we're asking you to reveal state secrets or anything." The irony of the comment was lost on Madison, who had no idea how close to the truth she'd accidentally come. Some of Rebecca's missions had indeed involved state secrets, operations that couldn't be discussed even in general terms without potentially compromising ongoing national security interests. Around them, the crowd of observers had grown larger and more obvious. What had started as a private networking conversation had become a public spectacle, complete with smartphones recording every moment. Rebecca could see the excited expressions on faces throughout the room. People who lived comfortable, safe lives were getting a rare glimpse of conflict, of drama, of someone being torn down in public. "You know what I think?" Patricia continued, her voice growing louder and more confident as she fed off the attention. "I think you're just another wannabe who watched too many military movies and decided to cosplay as a hero. Probably never left the continental United States, let alone saw combat." The words hit Rebecca like artillery fire. Patricia's casual dismissal of her service, her reduction of life-and-death missions to cosplay, revealed a complete inability to comprehend the reality of military service. This was a woman who'd probably never experienced genuine danger, never had to make decisions where failure meant people died, never carried the weight of responsibility that came with being someone's last hope for survival. Rebecca's hand tightened into a fist beneath the table, her carefully maintained composure finally beginning to crack. She thought about the faces of the people she'd pulled from burning helicopters, the families she'd reunited, the teammates who'd trusted her with their lives. The idea that Patricia could reduce all of that to pretense and attention-seeking was almost more than she could bear. "You have no idea what you're talking about," Rebecca said, her voice low but carrying a dangerous edge that made several people step back instinctively. But Patricia was too far gone to recognize the warning signs. "Oh, here we go, now we get the tough guy act. What's next? Are you going to tell us about your super-secret ninja training?" The mocking tone pushed Rebecca past her breaking point. She stood up so quickly that her chair scraped loudly against the floor, the sound cutting through the chatter like a knife. The sudden movement caused a ripple of reaction through the crowd. Some people stepped back, others moved closer, drawn by the promise of escalating drama. "You want to see it?" Rebecca said, her voice carrying clearly across the now silent ballroom. "You want proof that I'm not some fantasy playing fake?" Patricia's triumphant smile faltered slightly at the intensity in Rebecca's voice, but she was too committed to back down now. "Yes. Show us what you're hiding, or admit that you're just another civilian playing soldier." The challenge was direct and unmistakable. Rebecca looked around the ballroom at the faces staring back at her. Some eager for entertainment, others uncomfortable with the direction things had taken, all of them waiting to see what would happen next. She thought about walking away, about maintaining her dignity and privacy by simply leaving. But she knew that Patricia would interpret her departure as an admission of guilt, that the story would follow her into other networking events, other social situations. Rebecca's hand moved slowly toward her left sleeve, her fingers trembling slightly with suppressed emotion. The tattoo beneath the fabric represented everything she'd been, everything she'd sacrificed, everything she'd earned through years of service in the most dangerous job in the military. It was her connection to a brotherhood that had accepted her completely, a reminder of a time when her worth was never questioned and her valor was never doubted. But as she prepared to roll up her sleeve, Rebecca caught sight of movement in her peripheral vision. 3 women were approaching table 7 with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested they weren't just curious bystanders. Something about their bearing, their coordinated movement, their alert expressions suggested a different kind of audience, people who might actually understand what they were about to see. The realization that she wasn't entirely alone in this hostile environment gave Rebecca a moment of pause. She looked more carefully at the approaching women and saw something in their posture, their bearing, that spoke of shared experience. These weren't just more networking vultures coming to feast on her humiliation. These were people who carried themselves like they'd seen real conflict, real responsibility. "Well," Patricia demanded, apparently oblivious to the changing dynamics in the room, "are you going to show us this mythical tattoo or not?" Rebecca's hand hesitated at her sleeve as she watched the three women position themselves around the table. Their movement was subtle but unmistakably tactical, creating a defensive perimeter without appearing threatening, positioning themselves to intervene if necessary while maintaining the appearance of casual interest. Madison, still recording on her phone, grew impatient with the delay. "Come on, this is taking forever. Just show us already." The crowd around Table 7 had grown larger and more aggressive in their voyeurism. People were openly recording now. Some had climbed onto chairs to get better views. Others were live-streaming the confrontation to their social media followers. The elegant networking gala had devolved into something resembling a gladiatorial arena, with Rebecca as the unwilling entertainment. "Do it," Patricia pressed, her voice carrying the cruel satisfaction of someone who believed they were about to be proven right. "Show everyone what a real hero looks like." The sarcasm in her voice was unmistakable, and it finally pushed Rebecca past the point of rational decision-making. Her fingers gripped the edge of her sleeve, ready to reveal the symbol that represented the most important years of her life. But as she prepared to expose herself to the mockery and misunderstanding of people who could never comprehend what they were seeing, she noticed that the three approaching women had stopped just behind Patricia's chair. One of them, a woman with silver-streaked hair and intelligent eyes, caught Rebecca's gaze and gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head. The gesture was subtle, but clear. "Wait." Rebecca's hand froze on her sleeve as she recognized something in the woman's expression. Understanding, recognition, perhaps even protection. For the first time since the confrontation began, she felt like someone in the room might actually be on her side. Patricia, growing frustrated with Rebecca's hesitation, reached across the table as if to grab her arm and forcibly roll up the sleeve. "Fine. If you won't do it, I'll do it myself." But before Patricia's hand could make contact, one of the three women behind her spoke in a voice that carried unmistakable authority. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." The voice that cut through the tension belonged to Colonel Sarah Chen, and it carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to command. Patricia's hand froze halfway across the table as she turned to see who had dared interrupt her moment of triumph. "Excuse me?" Patricia said, her voice sharp with indignation. "This is a private conversation." Sarah stepped closer, her presence immediately shifting the dynamic in the room. Behind her, Lisa and Angela positioned themselves with the subtle precision of a coordinated team. The three women didn't look threatening, but there was something in their bearing that made the aggressive crowd around Table 7 unconsciously step back. "Actually," Sarah said calmly, "I believe you were about to assault someone. That makes it a public matter." The word assault rippled through the audience like electricity. Phones that had been recording the drama suddenly seemed less certain about capturing what might become a legal incident. Several people began backing away, sensing that the entertainment was about to become something much more serious. Patricia's face flushed deeper. "Assault? Don't be ridiculous. I was just trying to settle a question about her tattoo. She's been lying to all of us about her military service." Lisa Rodriguez stepped forward, her voice cutting through Patricia's bluster with surgical precision. "Staff Sergeant Rebecca Martinez, 212th Rescue Squadron. Pararescue jumper qualified. 6 combat deployments. Distinguished Flying Cross with Valor. Purple Heart. Combat Action Medal." She paused, letting the weight of the decoration sink in. "Would you like me to continue?" The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ambient noise from the kitchen and bar seemed to fade as every person in the ballroom absorbed what they'd just heard. Madison's phone nearly slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers. Jennifer's mouth fell open in shock. And Patricia looked like she'd been struck by lightning. Rebecca stared at Lisa in amazement, recognizing her now despite the civilian clothes. "Rodriguez? Lisa Rodriguez from the 48th. That's right, Martinez. Though I go by Major Rodriguez now." Lisa smiled, and for the first time all evening, Rebecca felt like she wasn't alone in hostile territory. "Been following your career for years. You pulled my teammate Danny Chen out of that burning Humvee in Mosul. He's got 3 kids now because of you." The revelation hit the crowd like a shockwave. These weren't abstract military decorations or distant wartime stories. This was personal testimony from someone who'd been there. who'd seen Rebecca's heroism firsthand. The woman they'd been mocking as a potential fraud was being vouched for by another veteran, who clearly knew exactly what she was talking about. Angela Foster stepped up to complete the circle of protection around Rebecca. "Captain Foster, formerly of the 23rd Special Tactics Squadron. I've read your after-action reports from Operation Golden Phoenix. Textbook, Combat Medicine Under Fire. You saved 12 wounded civilians in a hot landing zone while taking sniper fire." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back all evening. To hear her service acknowledged, her sacrifices recognized by people who understood their true cost, it was overwhelming. These women knew what those missions had really involved. The weight of responsibility, the life and death decisions made in split seconds. Sarah Chen placed a protective hand on Rebecca's shoulder. "And I had the honor of reviewing your medal recommendations as part of the Air Force Personnel Board. Rebecca Martinez is one of the finest pararescue jumpers who ever served. Her record is spotless, her valor unquestioned, and her service exemplary." The crowd around Table 7 was now completely silent, phones lowered, faces showing varying degrees of shock, embarrassment, and dawning understanding. The woman they'd watched being publicly humiliated wasn't just a veteran. She was a decorated war hero, someone who'd risked her life repeatedly to save others. Patricia sat frozen in her chair, her face cycling through emotions as the full magnitude of her mistake became clear. The stolen valor accusation that had seemed so clever moments earlier now hung around her neck like a millstone. She'd publicly accused a genuine American hero of fraud, and she'd done it in front of dozens of witnesses with recording devices. Madison slowly lowered her phone, the reality of what she'd been filming beginning to sink in. This wasn't just drama for social media. This was the public humiliation of a woman who'd earned more respect in a single deployment than Madison might accumulate in a lifetime. I didn't know," Patricia whispered, her earlier aggression completely deflated. "No," Sarah said, her voice carrying the cold authority of someone delivering a final judgment. "You didn't know. But instead of respecting someone's privacy, instead of assuming good faith, you chose to attack. You chose to accuse. You chose to humiliate." Lisa nodded toward Rebecca's covered tattoo. "The ink she's protecting isn't just decoration, it's the pararescue motto, that others may live. Every person who wears those wings has sworn an oath to risk their life for strangers. The reason she doesn't talk about it isn't shame, it's humility." Angela's voice carried a note of barely controlled anger. "While you were building your real estate empire in comfortable offices, she was jumping out of helicopters into combat zones to pull wounded soldiers and civilians out of harm's way. While you were worried about quarterly earnings, she was making decisions where failure meant people died." The three veterans had positioned themselves around Rebecca not just physically but emotionally, creating a barrier of understanding and respect that pushed back against the hostile environment she'd been enduring. For the first time since the evening began, Rebecca felt protected rather than exposed. "The Purple Heart she earned," Sarah continued, addressing the silent crowd, "came from shrapnel wounds she took while carrying a wounded child to an evacuation helicopter. She completed the rescue before seeking medical attention for herself." Rebecca touched her left temple unconsciously, where the faint scar Patricia had noticed earlier marked where a piece of mortar shell had grazed her skull during that mission. The child, a 6-year-old boy named Ahmad, had been bleeding out from an IED explosion. Rebecca had scooped him up and ran 200 meters through active gunfire to reach the landing zone. The Distinguished Flying Cross with Valor, Lisa added, was for a night rescue mission where she rappelled into a crashed helicopter to extract the crew while taking enemy fire. She went down 3 times to get everyone out, even after taking a bullet in the shoulder. The crowd was completely still now, hanging on every word. These weren't just military decorations being recited. They were stories of genuine heroism, of someone who'd repeatedly chosen to risk everything for the lives of others. Jennifer finally found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "Rebecca, I'm so sorry. We had no idea." Rebecca looked around at the faces surrounding her, some showing genuine remorse, others simply stunned by the revelation. The woman they'd spent the evening dismissing as secretive and arrogant was actually someone who'd demonstrated the highest form of courage and selflessness. "That's why she doesn't talk about it," Angela said softly. "Real heroes don't need to announce themselves. They don't use their service as networking tools or conversation starters. They've seen too much, lost too much, sacrificed too much to treat their experiences as entertainment. Patricia finally looked up, tears streaming down her face. God, Rebecca, I'm so sorry. I don't know how to. I never should have. Rebecca met her gaze with the steady composure that had carried her through countless dangerous missions. You didn't know, she said quietly. But maybe next time you'll remember that everyone carries invisible battles. Everyone has stories they're not ready to share. The revelation had transformed the entire atmosphere of the ballroom. What had been a feeding frenzy of social media drama had become something approaching a memorial service, a recognition of sacrifice, an acknowledgement of heroism, and a collective realization of how badly they'd misjudged someone extraordinary. The silence that followed the revelation stretched across the ballroom like a heavy blanket, broken only by the soft clink of ice settling in abandoned drinks and the distant hum of kitchen activity. Patricia sat slumped in her chair, her diamond earrings catching the light as her hands trembled with the magnitude of her realization. The woman she'd spent the evening attacking wasn't just a veteran. She was a living legend whose service record read like something from a military thriller. Madison stared at her phone's screen, where the recording had captured her own gleeful participation in the humiliation of an American hero. The social media content she'd been so eager to share now felt like evidence of her own cruelty. Her finger hovered over the delete button, but the weight of what she'd witnessed seemed too important to simply erase. I need to say something, Madison said quietly, her voice barely audible above the ambient noise. She stood on shaking legs, her phone clutched in her hands like a confession. I recorded this whole thing. I was going to post it online because I thought it would be entertaining. Her voice cracked. I was going to turn your pain into content for strangers to laugh at. Rebecca watched the young woman struggle with her conscience, recognizing the genuine remorse beneath the humiliation. What are you going to do with it now? She asked gently. Madison looked down at her phone, then back at Rebecca. Delete it. All of it. This isn't entertainment. This is someone's life. Someone who's already sacrificed more than I can imagine. She tapped the screen decisively. There. Gone. The gesture, small as it was, represented something larger. A recognition that not everything needed to be shared, that some moments deserved privacy and respect rather than viral fame. It was a lesson about the difference between connection and consumption, between understanding and exploitation. Jennifer had been silent through most of the revelation, but now she pushed back from the table and stood. Rebecca, I owe you an apology that goes beyond just tonight. When you first joined our networking group, I thought you were standoffish. I interpreted your reservation as arrogance. She paused, wiping tears from her eyes. I never considered that maybe you had good reasons for being private. I never thought about what experiences might make someone careful about sharing their story. Around the ballroom, other conversations had resumed, but they were different now, quieter, more thoughtful. Word of what had happened at Table 7 was spreading through the crowd in whispers, and with it came a collective reassessment of assumptions and judgments. Women who had been quick to share their own stories earlier in the evening were now thinking about the stories they didn't know, the experiences that remained hidden beneath professional facades. Sarah Chan remained standing behind Rebecca, her hands still resting protectively on her shoulder. This is what we don't talk about enough in civilian settings, she said, addressing not just the women at the table but the broader audience that had gathered. The transition from military to civilian life isn't just about finding new jobs or learning new skills. It's about learning to exist in a world where your most defining experiences are incomprehensible to most people around you. Lisa Rodriguez nodded, her own memories of difficult transitions surfacing. We spend years in environments where courage is common, where sacrifice is expected, where life and death decisions are routine. Then we enter civilian life, and suddenly those experiences become either invisible or sensationalized. There's no middle ground for normal recognition. Angela Foster stepped closer to the table, her voice carrying the weight of recent experience. I've been out for 8 months now, and I still struggle with conversations like the ones we have at these networking events. How do you explain that your last job involved coordinating medical evacuations under fire when someone asks about your previous work experience? How do you talk about your greatest professional achievement when it's classified at a level you can't even name? The questions hung in the air, highlighting the gap between military and civilian experience that so many veterans struggle to bridge. Patricia, who had been the most aggressive in her attacks on Rebecca, now seemed to understand the complexity of what she'd been demanding. I never thought about it that way, Patricia said slowly. I just assumed that military service was something people would want to talk about, I thought. I thought if someone had done important things, they'd want recognition for them. Rebecca finally sat back down, the protective presence of the three veterans allowing her to relax for the first time all evening. Recognition in the military comes from your teammates, from the people whose lives you've impacted, from knowing you did your job when it mattered most. It's not about public acknowledgement or applause from strangers. Sometimes the most important missions are the ones no one ever hears about. Sarah added, and some recognition comes with costs. When you've seen combat, when you've lost teammates, when you've carried wounded children through gunfire, those experiences change you. They're not networking talking points. They're not inspirational anecdotes for business dinners. They're profound, life-altering events that require careful processing and selective sharing. The conversation was drawing more people from around the ballroom, women who had initially been attracted by the drama but now found themselves engaged with something much deeper. A circle had formed around table 7, with Rebecca at its center, no longer isolated but supported by understanding voices. Dr. Samantha Williams, a pediatric surgeon who had been sitting at a nearby table, stepped forward hesitantly. I work in trauma medicine, and I've treated some of the patients you've rescued. Children, mostly, evacuated from war zones. Her voice was thick with emotion. I never knew who had saved them before they reached me. I just knew that someone incredibly brave had gotten them out of impossible situations. The connection between Rebecca's fieldwork and Dr. Williams' hospital care illustrated the ripple effects of heroism, how one person's courage in a combat zone could enable another person's healing work thousands of miles away. It was a reminder that heroism was often collaborative, part of a chain of caring that connected people across distances and circumstances. Rebecca looked up at Dr. Williams with surprise and gratitude. Those evacuations were team efforts. The pilots, the medics, the ground teams, everyone played a part. I just happened to be the one who went down on the rope. But you were the one who chose to go down the rope, Dr. Williams replied firmly. In situations where most people would freeze or run, you moved toward danger. That choice, repeated over and over across multiple deployments, saved hundreds of lives. Quote, an older woman named Catherine Morrison, who had been quiet during most of the evening's events, spoke up from the edge of the circle. My grandson is in the Army. He's deployed right now, and every day I worry about him. Knowing that there are people like you out there, people willing to risk everything to bring our children home, it matters more than you know. The personal connection transformed the abstract concept of military service into something immediate and emotional. Rebecca's work wasn't just about completing missions or earning decorations. It was about families staying whole, about children growing up with their parents, about hope surviving in the darkest circumstances. Madison, who had been listening intently to the expanding conversation, raised her hand tentatively. Can I ask you something? And please tell me if it's inappropriate. Rebecca nodded for her to continue. How do you carry all of that? How do you live with having seen so much, done so much, and then try to build a normal life? The question struck at the heart of veteran transition issues, the challenge of integrating profound experiences into ordinary civilian existence. Rebecca considered her answer carefully, aware that her response might help others understand not just her own journey, but the struggles of thousands of veterans facing similar challenges. You learn to compartmentalize, Rebecca said finally. You develop skills for separating different parts of your life, but you also learn that normal means something different for you than it does for people who haven't had those experiences. The goal isn't to forget or minimize what you've done, it's to find ways to honor it while building something new. Lisa Rodriguez added, and you learn to find your tribe, people who understand, who don't need explanations, who can provide support without judgment. That's part of why tonight was so important for me. Seeing Rebecca again, being able to provide backup when she needed it. The concept of tribe, of finding community among people with shared experiences, resonated throughout the ballroom. Many of the women present had their own challenges with finding belonging, with navigating professional environments that didn't always understand their backgrounds or perspectives. Angela Foster looked around the circle of faces, seeing not just the women who had attacked Rebecca earlier, but also the ones who had remained silent, the ones who had watched without intervening. This is what we can all learn from tonight, she said. When someone seems guarded or private, when they don't share everything about their background, our first assumption shouldn't be that they're being deceptive or arrogant. Maybe they're being protective. Maybe they're being careful. Maybe they have good reasons for the boundaries they maintain. Patricia, who had been silent for several minutes, finally spoke again. I owe everyone here an apology, not just Rebecca. I let my own insecurities and assumptions drive me to attack someone I knew nothing about. I made this room hostile for someone who deserved respect and support. Her acknowledgement of responsibility was important, but Rebecca could see the deeper pain beneath Patricia's words. The recognition that she'd become someone she probably didn't want to be, someone who attacked rather than supported, who demanded rather than respected. We all make mistakes, Rebecca said gently. The question is what we do with the understanding that comes afterward. Sarah Chen stepped back slightly, allowing the conversation to flow more naturally around Rebecca. That's the real lesson here. Not just about respecting veterans, but about recognizing that everyone carries experiences we can't see. Everyone has stories they're not ready to share. Everyone deserves the space to reveal themselves at their own pace, in their own way. The conversation had transformed the entire atmosphere of the ballroom. What had begun as a networking gala focused on professional achievement and business connections had become something much deeper, a community discussion about respect, understanding, and the hidden depths of human experience. Dr. Williams spoke again, her medical background adding another dimension to the conversation. In trauma medicine, we see people at their most vulnerable moments. We learn quickly that everyone who comes through our doors has a story, usually involving pain or loss or fear. We don't demand to know those stories before we provide care. We trust that people will share what they need to share when they're ready. The medical perspective offered a framework for thinking about civilian interactions with veterans and others carrying invisible burdens. Just as medical professionals provided care without requiring complete disclosure, civilian communities could offer support and acceptance without demanding full transparency. Catherine Morrison nodded thoughtfully. I think we live in a culture that expects instant intimacy, where privacy is seen as suspicious rather than healthy. Social media, networking events, even casual friendships, there's pressure to share everything immediately. But some experiences require time, trust, and the right context for sharing. The observation touched on broader cultural issues that affected not just veterans, but anyone whose experiences fell outside mainstream narratives. The pressure for transparency, for public sharing, for turning personal experiences into public content, had created environments where privacy was increasingly difficult to maintain. Rebecca felt the weight of the evening's events settling into something that might eventually become wisdom. I came here tonight hoping to build professional connections, maybe make some friends. I thought I could just focus on who I am now, without having to explain who I used to be. I learned that those parts of ourselves can't be completely separated. Madison raised her hand again, still looking slightly shell-shocked from her earlier behavior. So how do we do better? How do we create spaces where people can share what they want to share without pressure, where privacy is respected instead of attacked? The question opened up possibilities for changing the culture of networking events, social gatherings, and professional communities. Instead of demanding disclosure, they could create environments that welcomed whatever level of sharing people were comfortable with. Angela Foster smiled, seeing opportunity in the aftermath of the crisis. We start by assuming good faith. When someone seems reserved, we assume they have good reasons rather than bad ones. We ask open-ended questions that allow people to share what they want rather than demanding specific information. We create space for different communication styles and comfort levels. Lisa Rodriguez added, and we recognize that the most interesting people are often the ones who don't immediately tell you everything about themselves. Mystery isn't necessarily deception. Reserve isn't necessarily arrogance. Sometimes depth requires time to reveal itself. As the evening wound down, the conversation gradually shifted from analysis to commitment. Women throughout the ballroom were making personal promises to approach future interactions with more thoughtfulness, more respect for boundaries, more willingness to let relationships develop naturally. Patricia approached Rebecca one final time as the event began to disperse. I know my apology can't undo the harm I caused tonight, but I want you to know that I'll remember this conversation for the rest of my life. You've taught me something important about the cost of assumptions. Rebecca extended her hand, and Patricia took it gratefully. We all have something to learn from each other, Rebecca said. Tonight was painful, but maybe something good can come from it. As the three veteran women prepared to leave together, Rebecca felt something she hadn't experienced since leaving the military, the sense of being truly understood by her community. The evening had been brutal, but it had also connected her with women who shared her experiences and values. Sarah Chen handed Rebecca her business card. There's a veterans support group that meets monthly, mostly women transitioning to civilian careers. You might find it helpful. Rebecca took the card, realizing that her search for community might not require abandoning her military identity after all. Perhaps the goal wasn't to blend seamlessly into civilian culture, but to find ways to bridge both worlds, honoring her service while building new relationships. As they walked out into the cool Phoenix night, Rebecca reflected on the evening's events. She had come seeking professional connections and had instead found something more valuable: understanding, respect, and the reminder that her story, even the parts she kept private, had value and meaning. The night sky above Phoenix was clear, stars visible despite the city lights. Rebecca looked up, remembering nights in Afghanistan when those same stars had guided her through dangerous rescues. Tonight, they seemed to promise that the same courage that had carried her through combat could help her navigate the challenges of civilian life. Behind them, the gala continued its conclusion, but something fundamental had changed. In revealing her story, even partially, even reluctantly, Rebecca had given the other women a gift: the understanding that heroism often wears civilian clothes, that sacrifice sometimes goes unrecognized, and that the most profound stories are often the ones we're least eager to tell. The lesson would ripple outward from that ballroom, carried by women who would remember the night they nearly missed recognizing a hero because she was too humble to announce herself. In a world increasingly focused on self-promotion and public achievement, Rebecca Martinez had reminded them that the greatest accomplishments sometimes require the greatest discretion, and that true strength often appears as quiet grace under pressure. As the three veterans walked into the night, they carried with them not just their own stories of service and sacrifice, but the knowledge that they had stood up for one of their own when it mattered most. In protecting Rebecca from her attackers, they had also protected the values they all held sacred: honor, courage, and the commitment that others may live. The tattoo beneath Rebecca's sleeve remained hidden, but its meaning had been revealed in ways that went far deeper than ink on skin. Tonight, the Pararescue motto had been lived rather than simply displayed, embodied in the actions of women who chose to lift each other up rather than tear each other down. In the end, that might be the most important lesson of all: that heroism isn't just about dramatic rescues in foreign combat zones, but about everyday choices to protect, support, and honor each other in whatever battles we face, even the ones that unfold in elegant ballrooms on quiet Friday nights in Phoenix. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.